Thanks, Anna. Got it. Thanks, Anna, and thanks to all of you for being here. Good evening. It's morning for me, so um, yeah, it's great to spend some time together. Thanks to Rain for hosting the talk. I'm going to share my screen here. Please feel free if you have questions as we're going along. Feel free to type them in the chat. We're also a small enough group, so if you feel comfortable unmuting yourself and asking, that's great too. I'll be monitoring the chat, and again, feel free to speak up. So to start, I want to share just a little bit with you about my background and who I am. As Anna mentioned, my name is Mandy Gettler, and I work at a center at the University of Oregon called Industry, Innovation, and Translation. I help track and manage intellectual property with an emphasis on the copyright-based works here at our institution. And I work with faculty by co-leading the Women's Innovation Network to help them get their research and innovations out of the university and into the community for public benefit. And so as part of that work, the Women's Innovation Network supports women entrepreneurs as they navigate gender-based barriers to bringing their research to market. Prior to my role at Industry, Innovation, and Translation, I worked for 18 years at a language and culture center that developed educational technology. We were funded by a mix of federal grants, state contracts, and contracts with private educational companies. And I've also done some consulting with businesses here in Oregon to help them develop operational infrastructure and internal procedures. I have more experience working in public higher education institutions than I do in private industry, and so I always like to be upfront with folks about that. Today, we're going to be talking about understanding US business norms, and we will start out by talking kind of broadly about culture norms in the United States, and particularly in business contexts. And then we will look at more specifically networking in a US context. We'll talk about some of the language functions to move from kind of a surface level conversation to making deeper and more meaningful connections. We'll shift to talking about the gender gap in the US in entrepreneurship, innovation, and business, and then we'll wrap up with a question and response. I always say response because I want to be clear. I might not always have answers, but hopefully I have a little bit of wisdom to share or resources to connect you to. All right, so we're starting with like super big picture, very broad generalizations about cultural business norms in the United States. So above all else, US businesses typically want to make as much money as possible and to do that as quickly as possible. We are currently seeing kind of a generational shift away from some of those values with an emphasis not just on making money, but on being a good steward of the people within that company and stewardship of the environment. The kind of imperative to make a bunch of money quickly still holds true, but we are seeing that tempered with a sense of some ethical responsibility. In general, American business has what gets called achievement fever, which is a recognition that the work in American culture is really fast-paced and often individualistic. So on a whole, American workers take fewer breaks and fewer vacations than their counterparts globally. And as a culture, on the whole, we do not really prioritize rest. Again, there is a generational shift moving away from those ethos to work as quickly as possible at all costs, but that's still the expectation for a lot of American companies. We also have this habit of moving forward toward change and affecting change, even if that destination might be unclear at the beginning. So again, just overall kind of fast-paced emphasis on money, and we're seeing a shift away from that. American business people are likely to use humor, sarcasm, and irony, which globally is unusual. The function of that humor is really an attempt to create group solidarity. And if a joke or that humor is not well received, the person who's using that humor will often walk it back with just kidding. So that if that's a phrase that you hear, know that they recognize that like, oops, they might have crossed a boundary and they're going to try to backpedal a little bit. There's also a pervasiveness of sports metaphors in business. Again, this is really functional. The meaning that these metaphors are trying to convey is a sense of an individual, an employee working individualistically, much like a player on a sports team has to train and has to, kind of hone their own skills. And at the same time, in a business, you might be working as an individual, but you're also part of a team, part of a collective whole. And so that sports metaphor is an attempt to recognize everyone is working individually and that we should be all working toward a goal. And so you'll often hear phrases like, let's touch base again next week, which is a metaphor for baseball, right? There's a lot of baseball metaphors, a lot of American football metaphors, so not soccer. There's some pockets here in the US where like soccer is really popular here on the West Coast, but that's not true in other areas. As a whole, Americans tend to be uncomfortable with silence. So if there is silence during a business meeting, Americans will fill it often by vocalizing their own thought process. And this need to fill silence can be challenging for those who are from other cultures who expect and need time to process their thoughts before providing input. Americans also tend to be relatively informal. In a business context, we use first names. We will often share details about our families or our hobbies. And we typically don't use honorifics. In negotiations, Americans will tend to press for a yes in principle. So they will want everyone to kind of agree to work together at a very broad level, and then they will want to follow up with the details later. And often we become frustrated if conversations lean too heavily toward details before we've all agreed on the principle. Americans are also known for being sometimes blunt, or the perception is being confrontational. In a business context, we will often clearly state our position and state whether or not we agree or disagree with something and why. And there is an expectation that others do the same. And so if you are coming from a culture that is maybe a little bit jarring, just know that that is happening and that it is part of the American context. And then lastly, this will be no surprise, I don't think, to any of you here. Americans have very little awareness of other cultural norms. So don't be afraid if folks are kind of curious about your cultural background or, dress, social structures, or social formalities. It really is a curiosity and a little bit of an ignorance on our part. Like we really don't know. And that's kind of broadly true. That is a ton of information I just threw at you all at once. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute. And I'm going to open up some breakout rooms. And in those rooms, think through together kind of which of these norms do you think will be difficult for you and why? And so we'll spend maybe about 5 minutes on that. And then for the second 5 minutes, think about what strategies you could maybe use to ease that difficulty. And then we'll come back as a large group and share kind of what you've talked about in those small groups. You won't have to remember these questions. Once you're in the breakout rooms, I'll broadcast those questions to you, and I will let you know when to switch. So let's see. Make sure I get the right number of breakout rooms here. All right, so you should all get an invitation to join a breakout room. And go ahead and click join when that happens.
Wendy, you want me to join in some of the breakout rooms?
If you'd like to, otherwise you're happy to stay here. I've got a timer going in the background, so you'll hear that go off. I think, is it okay if I disable the waiting room? That way, if someone gets disconnected, they can just
Yeah, sure.
jump right back in. Yeah, it looks like one person maybe in particular is having some difficulty with their connection. Okay. Hello, are the folks that are still here? Have you received an invitation to a breakout room? And if not, if you would like to, let me know and I can assign you to a room. Otherwise, you're welcome to stay where you are.
I'm gonna go around to see how people are going in the conversation.
Hello, for folks that are just joining, I'm going to send you to a breakout room to join some of the discussions. Let's see. Uh, um, Hadir, there is a discussion question that's been posted in the breakout rooms. So we're talking about which of the cultural business norms might be difficult for you and why. Does anyone need me to resend the breakout room invitation? If so, just let me know in the chat. Let's see. Momina, it doesn't look like you have accepted the invitation to join a breakout room, so I'm going to resend it. So something should pop up on your screen inviting you to join a breakout room. Yadira, I'm trying to see if I can resend you to a room. Just a minute. Okay. I think I'm going to actually pull people back from the breakout rooms. So we'll get everyone back here. All right, I think folks are coming back from the breakout rooms. We'll give everyone just a minute to get back to this main room. Okay.
बस खत्म हो गया वो ऑटोमेटिकली
I think we've got everyone back from the breakout rooms. Would anyone like to share some of the things they talked about in terms of which business norm you think might be most difficult and why? Feel free to just unmute yourself and jump in.
Okay, so I talked about the fast-paced work because maybe it's totally different in the US than other countries, especially like Pakistan. So I discussed my concern that maybe initially that is a problem for us to catch that pace. And maybe It's not as difficult as I imagine right now, but it could be a possibility initially for me at least.
Yeah, that's a big adjustment to make if you're used to kind of a slower pace, which might feel more comfortable to you, and actually not slow. It would just be like a regular pace, right? And Americans might perceive that to be a slower pace. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Anyone else?
For us, we have been discussing that maybe to pen down a contract and make it official would be a difficult norm here, because in Pakistan we do believe in the word of mouth, and if the person is already experienced in his field, then we would believe anything they are saying. So that would be a challenge for us.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot more like based in paper, right? The written word in American culture is much stronger than a verbal agreement. Absolutely. Yeah. So that might feel a little uncomfortable, if you're asked to put something in writing, if you're used to just making verbal agreements, for sure. Did any of you in the breakout rooms talk about maybe strategies to adjusting to those differences?
Not really.
Yeah, that's the hard part. Sometimes the strategy is just noticing and knowing that it's different, right? Like knowing that there might be some friction there for you, or that it might feel a little bit uncomfortable. Like sometimes that's enough, just knowing that you'll be in that kind of a situation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Okay, so we finished kind of that first part of our agenda, very broadly US culture norms in a business context. And now we're going to kind of zero in on networking in a US context.
Okay.
Mandy,
yeah.
before you start, does anyone have any question of the previous section or something that they want to share?
Yeah, Anna, like one thing we discussed in the group, like how we can understand the US people about our culture, like Pakistani culture, how we can introduce our culture to them, so we both can on the same page for the first session.
Yeah, that's a good question. So strategies for sharing about your own culture. I would say that just pointing out, if you notice a difference, share that with others. If you are talking with someone and you noticed, maybe they're leaning more toward wanting to have something in writing, you could respond with, oh, that's interesting. Like in my culture, we really emphasize like verbal agreements, and the conversation is, really strong, and it feels like I just noticed that that's a difference. So pointing that out and being proactive if you notice a difference and sharing that, I think that would be really well received.
Thank you, Maddie.
Yeah.
Adding to that, I'm from Colombia and I study and I work in a US context, and most people are really open to that. So feel comfortable doing it. People will be curious on learning about how things are done differently in other parts of the world. And that's a pretty valuable moment for both of the people that are in the interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll share, like, when I have worked with other folks who are not from the United States, I love when they share their kind of cultural metaphors. So for example, in America, we say, like, you can't put the cart before the horse, which means, again, you don't want to work out the details before you've already agreed to something in principle. And I was working with a woman from Ukraine, and their phrase was, you can't divide the meat before you skin the bear. So, if someone uses a turn of phrase that you're not familiar with, just ask, like, what does that mean? And chances are there's a cultural equivalent for you. And that can be a really kind of team building solidarity moment to share how your culture would say that phrase. Yeah. Building a strong network. So I was asked to talk about networking because I understand some of you will be coming to the United States and you might be in situations where you are at a networking event. So the way that those look in the United States, it's kind of like a reception. There might be a little bit of food, usually some kind of wine or other alcohol, water, soda. And the intent is that you are all in a room and you're talking with strangers. So the kind of question that we're going to unpack is, when you're in a room full of strangers, how do you make a genuine connection with anyone, right? And how do you start building that network? Again, I tend to start kind of broad and then zero in on the details, right? So very broadly thinking about a network and how to build a strong one and who you might want in your network. So this would be like your community of professionals that you can go to if you have questions, or people who can celebrate your successes and help you work through challenges. So I do want to talk broadly about networking. Sometimes works differently for men and for women in the US context. So men and women typically begin networking at the same pace and the same frequency between the ages of 25 and 34. And we see a gender gap that grows in that mid-career phase, during which women are often starting their families. And so at that point, only 25% of women share that they network at least once a week compared to 46% of men. So that's a very big gap between the two genders there. And so when you're thinking about building and finding your own professional network, some of you might not be in a position where you have numbers on your side, where you can just walk into a room and just, kind of meet everybody and you feel very outgoing, or you have more opportunities to go to those networking events. So know that you can focus also on quality of connections instead of just quantity of connections. When you're starting out kind of building and finding that professional community, consider going to those who are working in industries that are adjacent to yours, who use approaches that you admire, or who have a personal way of carrying themselves that you connect with. By not looking for someone squarely in your industry, you can minimize perceived competition. And instead maximize learning from diverse experiences and perspectives. Professional networks also work differently for men and women in the US. For men, again, the larger the network, the more people in their community, the more they are likely to advance their careers. And for women, that's not true. Women who advance their careers more quickly maintain an inner circle of strong, deep ties to 2 or 3 women who they communicate with regularly. So know that too. You could also go deep and going lateral, finding people in adjacent industries, going deep, prioritizing stronger and more frequent connections with a fewer number of people. Another key thing to consider about building your professional community is to get as broad of perspective as possible, thinking about developing connections that don't have shared connections and contact. So oftentimes I'm in a position where I might need to find someone in a different industry, and I'm maybe one connection away. So I know someone who might know someone else. And it's more likely that happens if everyone who's in my network has a very different area of expertise, because then there's not much overlap. So that means when you attend networking events, you don't have to look again for someone who is doing exactly what you do, but instead focus on who you feel you have a connection with. I also try to help people at networking events find people who are givers and who will be more likely to care about your success, regardless of whether it benefits you or not. So those kinds of givers in the professional context are pretty easy to spot in conversation, because those are the ones that are going to ask you a lot of questions about yourself, about your work. They'll be interested in your culture. They will want to know things about you. The opposite end of that spectrum is a taker, right? So this is someone who cares only about their own professional success. they're also easy to spot in conversation because they're usually kind of looking around the room and trying to figure out while they're talking to you who they're going to talk to next. And you'll feel that they're not genuinely with you and trying to understand you and make a connection with you. And then somewhere in between are folks who are coined the term as matchers, right? So they're people who care about your success if it also benefits them. So, which is totally okay, because those are people who will like trade information with you, right? Like if you share something with them, they will share something with you. And so it's more of an exchange. Matchers can be a little bit more difficult to spot in networking situations because they can show up as kind of that giver role where they're like super curious about you and want to learn more about you, hear from you. Or they can kind of appear as the taker who's kind of looking around the room based on who they might think that you are, if they think that you might also be a matcher and that you can help one another. So I put this on its own slide because I think it's super important. Once you have folks in your professional community, please do not be afraid to use that network. Your network does not matter if you don't use it. Women in general have more close professional networks than men do, but they are less likely to ask that network for help, input, advice, and the reluctance to do so can stall their careers and their business growth. So putting that out there, if you've taken the time to build a professional network, use it. It's okay. In a US business culture, there are, again, a lot of networking events. We do a lot of like receptions in the like early evening time. So somewhere between like 4 to 7. And I wanted to focus on kind of some social strategies of how those networking contexts typically go. So they usually open with a greeting, hello being the most formal of that, and like, hey, being the more informal version of that. Hi is somewhere in between. Americans often ask like, how are you? How's it going? Please know, like, this is a question, but it's not like a genuine question, right? Because Americans are uncomfortable sometimes with honest responses. So we kind of expect a positive or a neutral response, even if it's not true. So if your honest answer would indicate that like you're feeling sad, angry, or overwhelmed or stressed, unless the person asking you the question, how are you, is a friend, what they really want to hear is a neutral answer. They don't want to hear a negative answer. So if you can respond in those instances with, I'm doing okay, even if you don't feel okay, like we wouldn't consider that lying. We consider that like social politeness, that you're not like sharing all of your negative feelings with acquaintances and people that you don't know very well. Most conversations at networking stay in this zone of polite conversation, and typical topics for that in an American context are the weather, hobbies, your children, pets, your childhood even. People might ask like where you grew up, what was it like? Please, and again, know that positive or neutral responses are expected. So even a question like, you know, where are you from? Where did you grow up? They want to, the American would expect, you know, some information about like geography, what kind of a city, was it a big city? Was it a small town? How long did you live there? Is your family still there? They wouldn't really want you to go into, you know, like negative childhood experiences, because again, we really just want a neutral or a positive response. Shifting from polite conversation to a meaningful connection, I'll share is a challenge for lots of people. It's a challenge for Americans working in an American context. So like, this is really a skill that takes some practice. I am a fan of a strategy to shift from that polite conversation to like making a meaningful connection with someone where you actually like get to know a little bit about who they are and what they're passionate about and how that shows up in their business. The strategy is called the Confident Confessor. So in this strategy, you reveal something a little bit vulnerable about yourself. But it should not be like revolutionary or overexposing, because remember, Americans don't want to talk about anything that they would perceive to be negative. So oftentimes I will say something like in a networking context, so I have to confess, I'm an introvert, and these types of events are kind of exhausting for me. So in saying that, I get either two responses. Sometimes the person sighs in relief. They're like, oh yeah, me too. And then we can talk about like, well, then I can follow up like, well, what are you really passionate about? What gives you energy if it's not these types of events, right? And then we can really connect there. Or the other person will say, really, I love this kind of stuff. I love talking with people and meeting new people. And then again, you can return to curiosity. If that happens, I often then kind of follow up like, oh, have you always been that way? And how do you harness that energy for what you do for a living, right? So just finding something about yourself that is a little bit revealing, but not overexposing, and stays kind of in that positive or neutral zone. So we talked about kind of greetings, the content of a conversation, right? At a networking, at a networking event, the topics that are usually covered, and then leave takings, right? Because we have to bookend the conversation. And sometimes it can be difficult to exit a conversation. So please know you can always, if you're talking with someone and you're like, feel like you're running out of things to say, or you're not really feeling a strong connection with that person and you want to move on, you can always excuse yourself to use the restroom, get some water, or find a friend, even if you don't actually have to. Americans would not consider that lying. They would consider that, again, like the social grace, right? Of you're like gracefully leaving the situation, and it's okay to say, you know, I'm gonna go get some water, even if you're not thirsty. Another phrase, and I've underlined this here, anyway, being kind of a transition word. So like, anyway, it was really great to meet you. I feel like I need to be moving along and meet some others. People would respond positively to that. And the cue of anyway indicates a shift in the conversation, and that you're going to lead with a close, and that you're going to start wrapping up that conversation. I also want to point out, when I've worked with folks from other cultures, Americans will often say like, oh, it was so good to meet you, let's get coffee sometime. And I've worked with others who are not Americans, who are frustrated by this, because it's not always a genuine invitation. You know, they're like, oh, well, they said we should get together for coffee sometime, but we never did it. Maybe they don't like me. Please know it's not that. Let's get together for coffee sometime means that they're open to future conversations. But again, like, we agree in principle on things, right? Like, we agree in principle that we liked talking to each other, but we're not going to focus in on the detail, and we're not going to actually schedule something. If you want that phrase, like if someone says, let's get together for coffee sometime, to be a genuine invitation, it's fine to follow up by email afterward and say, hey, I really enjoyed meeting you at this event. I really would like to get together for coffee sometimes. Would one of these days or time work for you? Or can we schedule a Zoom call? Do you have availability in this window? That's totally fine to do that. It will probably take you needing to initiate that. Americans will often just kind of leave that as an open invitation and not follow up. So if you want it to be a genuine invitation, you might have to follow up by email after the event. So again, this is a lot of information all at once, and I want to give us some time to practice. So I'm going to open up some breakout rooms again. When you get into the breakout rooms, practice introducing yourself. Practice finding a detail that you can share about yourself that is true, but stays in the positive or the neutral context that Americans would typically expect. to hear. All right, I am going to reopen the breakout room. If you have difficulty joining a breakout room, send me a message in the chat and let me know, or stay in this main room and just unmute yourself. So I'm going to open up the rooms and we'll be here maybe just for 5 minutes. So this is a shorter activity. Okay, folks here who are still in the main room, it's fine if you want to stay here. But if you do want to join a breakout room, or if you're having technical challenges, please just unmute yourself and let me know, and I'm happy to help you.
Is anyone having trouble to get to the breakout room? You just need to go in the bottom of your screen. There is a sign of 4 squares that says breakout rooms, and you select that and it would tell you which breakout room do you have, and it will say join, if that's of help.
And it looks like one person is in a room by themselves, so I'm going to jump into that room and be back. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. I can work here. So for the ones that are here in the main session, have you experienced having kind of a networking connection with someone, how it's different? And if we want to do a mock networking event, I can be of help if someone wants to be the other person and we can talk about it. I'm curious to know which of you are feel comfortable networking. Some of us, I don't feel pretty good networking. It's not my cup of tea. But I'm curious to see how comfortable do you feel networking in either context in Pakistan or in another culture. Do you hear me?
Well,
We don't hear you. I heard the beginning what you said, but now I'm not hearing you. I don't know if it is on my side.
I love to.
Yeah. Does anyone want to share their experience networking?
Yeah, hi.
Thank you, Sadia.
We had a good chat introducing ourselves and what we do or what we strive or aspire to do, and what our experiences have taught us and how to go about it in the future.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right, I think we're waiting for a couple of folks to come back from the breakout rooms. Okay. Does anyone want to share how that felt? Was that pattern of introduction, was it similar to your culture or different?
Hi.
Hello.
It
What did
was it was very interesting to know each other because it was everyone was from basically like a similar field but still different, you know. And yeah, because everyone is doing their part for women entrepreneurship but in a different path. So that was new and it was interesting, and we did share our, you know, teeny weeny experiences or how to go about it in the future. So it was nice. It was, I think it was very similar to what happens globally for an ice breaking ceremony. So yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for sharing your experience.
Hi, can I share my experience?
Okay.
Yes, please do.
Okay, so I'm Aisha Abrar, and I'm working currently in one of the university in Islamabad, and I had a room with Waiza Rahman, and so we started an introduction. What are we doing, and which city we are based in, and then we found that we are actually very much near to each other, which is in the same city and
Okay.
in the same field, and accidentally. What happened is that Waiza is an entrepreneur and I have PhD in entrepreneurship. so there were a lot of similarities which I actually really enjoyed. But yeah, it was different probably because we knew that we have only 5 minutes and we have to wind it up quickly. Probably if we have like 15 minutes and maybe we could have have it a little different than what we had right now. It was very interesting.
Yeah. Aisha,
Yeah, and a little different, I believe, from because you know when Mandy, when you were telling us about the U.S. culture, so when people first meet, so they talk about how are you doing, and you know, some kind of questions that are informal, more informal, but kind of an ice-breaking questions. But I think we kind of like started right away from where we belong and what are we doing. So it was a little different probably in that sense. Yeah.
That's great. I'm glad you were able to get past kind of the initial, you know, context and really start making some connections there, even in a short amount of time. That's great.
hi, my name is Vaiza. I just want to add in the conversation which just Aisha did. It was really amazing that we had just little time and we had to share so many things about ourselves and what we are doing. I'm really glad that we had this opportunity. But the time was short. I'll second what Aisha said. And I really want to know about Aisha because I actually talked about myself a lot, that what I do and what everything is. And the thing she talked about related the connection we make, that whatever is in the US culture and what actually is in Pakistan culture, that we are little um, close-minded in a way that we do not open ourselves and we don't talk uh, right away about ourselves and what actually we do. But what I believe, it it's in the culture. Yes, I agree with this thing, but it also depend upon the kind of exposure you get. So we both are from the same field. We are in the education sector, and we actually are doing teaching, and we are doing the businesses. And I am really glad to know that she has the PhD in entrepreneurship, and I am doing my business as well, apart from doing my PhD and doing my training and consulting job as well. So this is basically actually the kind of exposure we both have, and we know we can talk. So we talked right away. So this was the plus point, which varies person to person. I guess this is the thing.
Great.
Thank
Uh,
you.
If you two didn't share contact information, maybe send a direct message to each other in the chat, because it sounds like you connected. So that's great. I want to make
There
sure.
are matches.
Yeah.
Yeah, matches. Yeah, it was a match.
Yeah, great.
It was a match.
I
And just
yeah.
to jump in, this is great, and thank you for this exercise, because these kind of workshops, and what we aim is that this is your first network, and that will build in this network between the universities and their faculty and the students that are participating in the program. So thank you for that, and I take note that you would like more of this kind of exercise to connect between the students for a future workshop in the project.
Yeah, I had some other things I was hoping to cover, but I'm aware of our time. It has like flown by. And I want to make sure that if there are questions that we have time to take them. I'm also going to put my email in the chat. And so if anyone would like to talk after this one-on-one, I'm happy to set up a time to do that. So my email is there in the chat. Please feel free to reach out and consider me part of your professional network now. So even if, you know, months later you have questions and you think I might be able to help, I'm happy to do that. So I'm going to open it up. Do you all have questions or things you want to talk about?
Not a question, but I think, from all this discussion, I kind of noticed one thing, that probably in Pakistan is one thing that a lot of people, they are shy to use their network. So probably they know a lot of people, but when it comes to, collaborating with them or using them, using means, I mean, I'm not saying in a negative sense, I'm saying like in a positive thing in which, it could be either a match or a giver, right? So probably we are shy to do that. And I actually agree when you said that do not be shy to use your network, to connect to them. And when you know that there's a person in your network who can be of benefit to what you're doing. So I really like that point. Actually, there are certain times when you're attending a workshop, so there are certain points that really click. So a lot of other points also, I really like this entire discussion, but this one I liked a lot. And I think I probably might be emphasizing this in my new Venture Creation course as well, because we do have an element of networking. So I believe I will be using this. Yes, I really liked it. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Hi, Mandy.
Yes, hi.
Thank you so much for your time. It was actually, a refreshing kind of session. I have a question. Does this course or does this program stick to one city only or no?
That might be a question for you, Anna, about the Pakistani program that y'all are running.
Yeah.
So we have ComSat, Fatima Jinnah, and Varia universities as part of this program right now, but we are in conversation with the embassy, the United States Embassy in Pakistan, and we might have other connections in other cities based on what is happening in the network of entrepreneurs in Pakistan and how things are moving. But for now, we're just working with the 3 universities.
Anna, I'm working in NUST, National University of Science and Technology in Islamabad. And I'll be very glad if I could be of help to connect you, to any required network that you can, I mean, we can discuss, and I would really like to be of any help in this regard. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Can you put your email in the chat? I got it to the registration, but I can do that and we can move forward this conversation. I know AXA and the team will be very happy to hear this.
Yeah, just send my email address. Thank you.
Yeah, perfect. Any other questions, observations?
So this program, Drivers of Economy, does this take place only in Washington, D.C. when we arrive there, or no?
No, we like the students that are selected are going to Oregon, to Eugene. We're gonna be mostly there. We're gonna visit Portland and Lawrence and other natural areas around Oregon, but it's mostly in Oregon it takes place, and Pakistan in Islamabad.
Okay, thank you.
Anna, do you have any final kind of bookend that you need to do here before we
No,
wrap up?
no, I just want you to close the workshop and I can give some logistic information after that.
Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. Again, I've dropped my email in the chat. Please do feel free to send me an email. Looks like I've got a couple of direct messages, so I'll follow up with those folks. Again, thank you so much for being here. I'm happy to continue the conversations with you if you would like. So yes, thank you. And thanks again for Rain to hosting.
No, thank you, Mandy, for your session. It was pretty informative. We can see if a lot of people are asking you more information, we can think about a future workshop, and Mandy's gonna be part of the trip abroad. We're working with her in the itinerary and everything, so you might see her when you come to the United States. And thank you for your time. Thank you, everyone. We know it's a little bit late in Pakistan, so we appreciate your time of participating, your active participation in this workshop, and let us know if you want more of these kind of workshops. We can make it fit to the different activities we are doing. And have a nice weekend.
Thank you,
Thank
Anna.
you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
And I hope you
Thank you,
are
Mandy.
well
Thank
now.
you,
I've
Anna.
heard that you are little, unwell. Get well soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, bye. Thank you.
Bye, you're welcome. Oh.
And then Anna, do you need anything from me?